Hey everyone, this is Liz. So this is going to be the quick guide for modeling a charm ring. So if you are more new to Tinkercad and would like to take it a little more slowly, I would recommend following the full live stream, which is more like modeling and demoing in real time. This is really going to be a pretty rapid fire walkthrough of just the steps with really very little commentary. So that's the warning. Otherwise, let's jump right in. So, okay, Tinkercad window, here we go. So, the way that this ring is going to work is we are going to start by modeling the base ring, the ring shank, and then we are going to add the little jump rings. And actually, let me just quickly show you what this part will look like to aid in this conversation. So, right down here. Yeah. So yes, we are going to start by modeling this base ring. We will then add the jump rings and then we will model the final shape, and I'll show you a couple different ways that you could design this charm. This is just one example that I have. So jumping right in. So the first thing that you are going to need is to add a ring shape from the basic shapes menu onto the work plane. So that's this brown ring shape that we're going to do. And you'll see here that when we add this shape in, that this little sketch pops up. And so this sketch is the cross section of this ring band. And what we want to really pay attention to is the outer side, the right side of the sketch, which will drive or determine the outside of the ring shank. So what you're going to really want to do here is start to reshape this. And so what I mean is you'll see that when I pull this node, you can see that my cross section is changing as I move this. So you're going to want to basically just reshape the ring to your liking, making it, the way I had assumed that this would become a sort of chunkier, more rounded shape. So pulling these sort of nodes, grabbing the box moves the position, grabbing these little circles moves the arc and kind of controls the tangency or the curvature of the line itself. So you can see I'm actually affecting the curvature of the arcs. So just start to get that reshaped to your liking so it's more rounded out here. And then the next step that we're going to do, and then feel free during this video just to pause after each step and then do this yourself. So again, I'm kind of running more quickly through these steps. If you want more of the real time where you can just listen in and just kind of follow along as we go, that would be the live stream recording. Okay, so we're going to size this ring to follow our ring size. So I always use a size 6, which is my ring size, and that is 16.5 millimeters. So what we're going to do is you need to know what your ring size is at this point. Once you have that number in millimeters, you are then going to determine what the band thickness is going to be. And so in my case, I would like to have a 2 millimeter thick finished band. So I have to add 2 millimeters to either side of my ring shank measurement of 16.5. So that's a total of 4 millimeters. So the math is ring size, so 16.5 millimeters plus 2 millimeter wall thickness, 2 millimeter wall thickness. So for me, I am changing the ring dimensions to be 20.5. And you may just need to sort of pause and do the quick math for yourself. And you'll have to really decide what do you want that wall thickness or that ring shank thickness to be. The last thing we are also going to do, let's see. Nope, we're good to go there. Okay. So we now basically have the geometry that will be the ring. However, we need to actually now cut a hole that follows to set the actual ring size, because we don't really know right now what this internal dimension is. We only know what the outside dimension is. So to do that, we're going to grab a cylinder hole, drop it onto the work plane. And at this point, the first thing you'll do to this is increase the number of sides up to 64, and that just gives us a nice smooth circle. When it's lower, you can see it's more faceted, right? These flat faceted faces. So increase it to 64 number of sides. And then now you need to resize this. So now this cylinder hole is going to be your actual ring size. So for me, size 6, 16.5 by 16.5. So then now I think you can probably imagine what we're about to do. We are now going to use a bounding box to grab both of these items. You can also select them by clicking on one item to select it, holding shift, click the other one, and we're going to align them. So we want to align the center points, which are the two center gray nodes. Doesn't really matter to this direction because we're going to be cutting through this. We just want to have these centered. So what you need to look for right now is ideally this cutout or this cylinder hole is going to overlap into the ring itself. You can see that mine does not. You can see that there's a little bit of a gap right here. So what that tells me is that I need to start to work on revising this left side of the sketch to make this an overall thicker band. So to do that, I'm just going to drag this way out here. And you'll notice that as I'm doing this, it's not really my whole ring size or my ring body is changing dimensions. So we're just going to go ahead and reset that. So, but right now I'm just making it a lot chunkier so that I have room to cut away. So this could be a bit of a back and forth process for you. So now that I've changed it, I need to go back and reset my size to 20.5 by 20.5. And I need to realign center points. And now I can see that this is what I want. You can see when I navigate to the flat top view that there is a nice healthy overlap right there. That's what I'm looking for. So then the last thing that I want to do is at this point, I want to decide what my thicknesses of this ring itself. So because this is going to be like a delicate little charm ring, I'm going to actually go much thinner on this. I would recommend going anywhere from as thin as 1.5 to up to about 4 or 5 millimeters. If you go more than 5, be aware that you will likely need to size up your ring. The wider the ring, the larger size required to fit your finger. So once you've got that, just double check those measurements, 20.5, 20.5, and 16.5. Okay, so now I will be grouping these two items together to cut away, resulting in a perfectly fit size 6 ring for myself. So that's the ring shank. Okay, so at this point, we are going to be adding jump rings. So one thing that I want to mention, if you do plan to fabricate this through Shapeways, I can't speak to other 3D printing softwares or services. Certainly this might be a possibility. I'm only really talking about Shapeways. So Shapeways allows you to print and fabricate interlocking items. And so what does that mean? So the jump rings themselves, in a more traditional method of fabricating this ring, you would build your ring shank, you would then build purchase your jump rings, and then you would solder them on and attach them. We don't have to worry about that. In this case, we can just assemble this, upload the assembled file into Shapeways, and then they will fabricate it. However, you have to make sure that you have 1 millimeter of clearance all around every object that interlocks. So I just wanted to give you that disclaimer so that you can understand why we're doing the next steps the way that we do them. So to get a jump ring started, a new tool over here, we're going to be using the torus tool. So grab a torus and drop it kind of next to your ring. So this is sort of a funny tool. When I click on it, there's all these different features or variables. However, they don't work exactly the way that you might think. I'm still kind of getting a handle on how they, like what they each mean. And so I just need you to follow along what I'm about to do because I've already kind of done the trial and error to land on the smallest jump ring size that you can do based on Shapeway's requirements. So we're adding a torus to the work plane. We're then going to update the settings in this order. Radius changes to 8. Tube stays 2.5. And then we are going to resize this to be a 6.5 diameter. So 6.5, 6.5. And then we're going to, it looks like a little bead right now. Then we're going to change the height to be 2 millimeters. Okay, so let me just repeat that again. So I first changed the radius to 8. I left the tube at 2.5. Then I sized the diameter to 6.5 by 6.5. And then I changed the height to 2 millimeters. So just trust me on this one. If you do it a different way, you may end up with a ring that's too thin or doesn't leave enough spacing around it. So if you plan to fabricate through Shapeways, this is what you want to follow. Okay, so we are now going to start to position this. So the first thing is go back to that original ring shank. We're going to rotate it by 90 degrees. And we're actually just going to move it down right now so that it's basically like sitting kind of right below the work plane. And it doesn't have to be perfectly precise. This is just more like for your own like ease of working. I'm actually just going to set it so that just the top of the 12 o'clock point on the ring is peaking above the work plane. And I did that by just clicking on the front view in this navigational cube and then using this orthographic and flat view to flatten it, more like a sketch or an illustration. Okay, so rotated our ring. So now we are going to use the align tool on these two rings and align the center points. Just this center point. I'm sorry, these two center points. So I'll show you that on screen so you can see how it's sitting. Okay, so we're going to navigate to the top view and we're going to change the snap grid to 0.25. Snap grid, in case you're not aware, the grid is these dark boxes by the lighter boxes. The dark box is 10 units, in this case millimeters, which is the default increment. And then these smaller boxes are 1/10 of a centimeter, so 1 millimeter boxes. So there's 10 of these in here, 10 millimeters is 1 centimeter. So snap grid means, it defaulted to 1, means that whenever I move using the arrows or dragging an object, it moves in 1 millimeter increments. I need a little bit more flexibility and a little tighter motion. So I'm going to change this down to 0.25. And I'm essentially now going to move this jump ring into position. And so what does position mean? In this case, we want the entire hole in this blue jump ring to be exposed. So this is ideal because you can see the entire hole is intact. This is not ideal. Not ideal, not ideal. You could go like that. You could go like that. You just want this entire hole to be not colliding with the main ring because I need all of the space based on Shapeway's requirements. So in terms of check out the front view as well and make sure that you're not cutting into your ring size, which I can see that I am. So I'm going to actually have to raise mine up as well so that, again, this like 12 o'clock point, like this is a full circle right here. Otherwise, you're basically going to be cutting into the fit and the comfort of your ring. So now that I've done this, I'm actually like, oh, I might need to move this a little bit forward again. So that's fine for me. It looks a little bit like obvious right now, or a little bit crazy right now because the colors are so different, but a lot of this will get polished down. And so you won't really see that same definition in quite the same way. You could also, let's see here. Let me just double check this is the difference. I'm sorry. Okay. So if you were following along, this is actually supposed to be 1.5, not 2. That was my mistake right there. Sorry about that. So that should be, I was thinking it looked a little bit thick right there. So yeah, 1.5, and that should resolve any kind of surface collision issue that you're having. And then let me just double check. I can see that I've accidentally, there we go. Perfect. So my entire cutout is showing. Okay. So getting back to where I was. All right. So we now have one of our jump rings done. We are going to select this and duplicate this, and then use our arrows again to move this copy into position. We also need to rotate this by 90 degrees so that it's running perpendicular to the first jump ring, just like that. Okay. So let's jump into modeling the charm, and then we're going to kind of get back to these rings a bit later. So the charm itself. So before we do that, we want to hide the ring band and the original jump ring. And that's just selecting the two of them and then hitting the light bulb up in the corner to hide them. And we want to go ahead and lock this one because we don't really need to do much with it. We just want to reference its position for the time being. Okay, so modeling the charm. So one really cool trick that I want to show you is how to leverage existing clip art or to create your own clip art to make a charm. And this is a really cool tool. So basically, if you were to find very simple black and white simplistic artwork, you can convert it into an SVG file. There is a link in the description of this class for an online one that I use. But basically, you need an SVG file. Once you have that, let me show you what you can do. So I just went up here and I clicked Import up at the top, choose a file. In this case, I found an anchor ring, an anchor shape. So you can see this is what my SVG file looks like. So it's a very simple item. So it previews the image here. It then tries to set it to a large set of dimensions. These right now, these just like, numbers. These are dimensions. So this is 1211 millimeters. Realistically, I only need to start with like 10 millimeters here. You can always resize this. And then you hit import. And this is so cool. So there it is. And it is a perfectly editable piece of geometry like one of these shapes. But you created this from your own artwork. So you can find clip art. You can also use a white piece of paper and a Sharpie or a black pen, and you can create your own image. So I'll give you an example of another one that I did. Which was, so this is my own handwriting that I use a Sharpie to create my name. And then I just took a photo with my iPhone and emailed it to myself and then used the online converter to create an SVG file out of it. And now you can see how easy it is to go from a sketch that you created with your own hand into geometry, which is editable. So have fun with that. So, okay. So at this point, you can leave this as is. You can also edit it in any way that you want. So in my case, I know that so first of all, I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. This is me more just showing you how to, some ways to make a charm. What you end up doing is kind of up to you. But I just wanted to give you sort of an example of a cool trick that I hadn't shown yet thus far. So at this point, if your artwork is once you scale it down, maybe there's some areas that are a bit too small, that's totally fine. You can now use other objects to add or subtract geometry from them. So in this case, I am going to fill that hole because I'm not going to use that hole. Make this a little bit bigger. So in this case, I am just adding some geometry right there. Make sure I set this to be 1.5 like my anchor already is. And then I can group these items together. And now I have removed that. I can also use Scribble to either create a charm entirely, or I've decided that I want to reshape my anchor. So watch how I'm going to do that. So Scribble's a nice tool. You like literally draw and it creates geometry, which is also editable. This is sort of like a magic wand tool, like if you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator. So now I've created this like massive piece of geometry, but I can scale it way down. And I can use this to reshape my anchor a little bit. So I'm trying to basically fill in a little bit more geometry right here so that this is not quite so delicate. There's a bit of a breaking point right there, especially at this size. So actually, I probably need to change my snap grid because I'm working in such a small size. Yeah, and I actually might be like, oh, that's a little bit of a funny spot right there. I can edit this. Isn't that great? And I can erase it too. Let's see how that works. Yeah, that's looking better to me. It's not like a big bump in there anymore. So I can then duplicate this. I can mirror it to the other side. And I can move that so that I do the same thing to the other side quite easily. Now I can group that together and I have one. Oops, that was the wrong height. See, I had this little spot peeking up right here. Change that to 1.5. Now group this. And now I have a slightly revised anchor, more to my liking. So there you go. So that's a fun way you can do this. So one thing I'm just kind of noticing as I look at this is a very skinny wall right here. So I'm actually just going to increase the size of this because I feel like that's probably too delicate, going like way less than a millimeter. Yeah, that's better, about 1 millimeter thick. So once you have your charm, however you get there, you then can position the charm. And I recommend, this is, you'll see now why I'm recommending doing this is because this charm has to interact with this ring. This ring spacing and size is somewhat dependent on the previous ring that we made that's now hidden. So I recommend getting your charm all figured out and positioned to where you want it first. You can use a line to get yourself more centered. Sometimes a line doesn't always work when one object's locked. I'm not sure why. It's fine. Use arrows. So, okay. So now that we have this, I'm going to unlock this and I'm going to group. Actually, I'm not going to group yet. So I'm going to unlock this. I got to make sure to check my side view to make sure that I like the position of this charm. I think I'm going to need to move mine up. There we go. So let's now finish this up. So to do that, you want to, let's see here. Somehow some objects have become not hidden. Okay, so you want to show all of your objects. And you can go ahead and at this point, what you can do is go ahead and turn this to be a hole temporarily. And the reason why I'm saying that is that when this is a hole, you can see through it and you can see what's happening all around this. Remember how a little bit ago I said that to fabricate this entire piece as one assembled part, meaning that it's 3D printed in one assembled part and it's casted as one assembly. You can do that as long as you have enough room around all of these objects which interlock. So that means spacing around here and spacing here. So any object that is interlocking has to have 1 millimeter of clearance. So I turned this to be transparent so that I could really see if I'm like even. So one thing that I'm noticing right now is that I need to, this is not very centered. So I need to actually use my arrows to move this so it's much more evenly placed. When I told you to please follow me for this ring sizing on all these like little variables or settings, it was so that I can make sure that you made a ring that met the minimum size. So you can make these rings bigger. You can't make them smaller if you plan to fabricate through Shapeways. So at this point, we are going to, I now see that like I've got 1 millimeter here. I don't quite have like 1 millimeter here. So in this case, I have two options. I can either move this so that I'm ensuring that there's a millimeter here, but look, I've run into the edge of that jump ring. So rather than moving it, well, I'm actually going to move this down, but I'm actually just going to elongate this so that it's more like an ellipse. Now, one thing that has happened when I did that is I've actually stretched out the cross section. So I have sort of lost my millimeter right here. So, you probably will need to go back and adjust that, or you can stretch this out a little bit as well and kind of go back and forth. So this is one of those where I wouldn't put too much time and effort into positioning this and finalizing it until you've sent all this to Shapeways and done the checks to make sure that like the tolerances are correct, because there could be other areas that you didn't realize that are not meeting tolerance requirements. So just one thing to kind of keep in mind. So assuming that you did all that and your ring matches all the design guidelines, at this point, you can go ahead and grab all of this. You can group all of this together, and you now have one object, and you can export it and send it to Shapeways. And if you have not already, definitely check out my tutorial on how to use Shapeways. You certainly don't have to use it, but it's a great tool if you would like to fabricate this, especially like in metal. I think this ring was fairly inexpensive, relatively so, to have casted. Yeah, so this is depending on whether you do brass or bronze versus sterling silver. Brass or bronze will run you about $15 for something like this, and sterling silver will run $25 or around 25-30. So there's totally the possibility of having this fabricated through Shapeways. So yeah, if you want to do that, check out my other video, which shows how to export and then gives you some tips about the Shapeways process. Otherwise, yep, that's it. Thanks for joining me. Feel free to email or reach out through my website, if you have any questions. Happy modeling.